He had flown over 2 million miles in his life. He knew the sound of a jetway, the smell of recycled air, the particular exhaustion that comes from living at 30,000 feet. He had sat in first class on 6 continents. He had shaken hands with senators and signed contracts worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. And yet on a Tuesday morning at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, a gate agent pointed her finger directly at his face and told him, in front of a crowded terminal, that he did not belong where he was standing. He did not raise his voice. He did not move. He simply looked at her and waited. What happened in the next 45 minutes would change everything for everyone in that terminal. But not in the way any of them expected. Welcome to the Black Voices. If stories like this one speak to something deep inside you, something you have lived or witnessed or carried quietly for years, then this channel was built for you. Please subscribe if you have not already. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And stay with us, because this story is one worth sitting with. Darnell Washington was 51 years old, and he looked every bit of it in the best possible way. He had the kind of face that had earned its lines honestly, the kind of jaw that had been set through difficult meetings and difficult mornings and the particular difficulty of building something from nothing in a world that did not always make space for men who looked like him. He wore a charcoal gray suit that had been tailored on a street in London, a deep navy tie with a small gold pin near the collar, and a watch that his mother had saved for 4 years to give him the Christmas after he finished his MBA. He never bought a different one. The watch was not about money. It was about her hands and what they had done for him. He was the founder and chief executive of KW Capital Group, a private equity firm headquartered in downtown Chicago with offices in Atlanta, Houston, and New York. The firm managed close to $4 billion in assets and had made careers for hundreds of people, many of them young men and women who had come through doors that Darnell had opened specifically because no one had opened those doors for him. That was not a detail he put in press releases. It was simply the way he ran his life. On this particular Tuesday, he was booked on a 7:15 flight to Washington, D.C. He had a Senate subcommittee meeting in the afternoon, a dinner with 2 partners that evening, and a breakfast commitment the following morning with a nonprofit that worked with formerly incarcerated men trying to re-enter the workforce. His assistant had confirmed his first-class booking 3 times. His boarding pass was on his phone. His seat was 2A, the window seat in the second row, which he preferred because it was quiet and the light in the morning came through clean and clear, and he liked to think during those early hours before the day consumed him. He arrived at the gate with 12 minutes to spare. Not frantic, not late. 12 minutes as a man who has done this before. He stood in the priority boarding lane, his carry-on bag over one shoulder, his phone in his hand showing the boarding pass. The gate area was full. Families, business travelers, a few people in military uniforms, the whole human texture of a major airport on a weekday morning. The gate agent was a woman in her late 30s, blonde hair pulled back neatly, a red, white, and blue scarf folded at her collar. Her name tag said Christine. She was processing boarding passes with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done the job long enough that most of it no longer required her full attention. When Darnell stepped up and held out his phone, she glanced at it, glanced at him, and then glanced back at his boarding pass with a pause that was almost imperceptible. Almost. She said, "This lane is for first-class passengers and elite status members." Darnell said, calmly, "I am a first-class passenger." She looked at his boarding pass again. She looked at him again. Something in her face shifted in a way that was small but visible to anyone who was paying attention, and several people in line behind him were paying attention. She said, "Can I see your ID, please?" Darnell reached into his jacket and produced his passport, which is what he always traveled with domestically because it eliminated a particular kind of conversation. He placed it on the counter. She opened it. She looked at the photo. She looked at him. She typed something into her computer. She typed something else. And then she said, in a voice that she had calibrated to sound helpful while communicating something that was not helpfulness at all, "Sir, I am going to need you to step to the side while I verify this." The line behind him had stopped moving. People were watching. A few had already raised their phones. Darnell did not step to the side. He said, "What needs to be verified?" She said, "Our system is showing some inconsistency with this booking." He said, "What inconsistency specifically?" She said, "Sir, if you could just step aside, I can get this sorted out quickly." He said, "I have been a Platinum Premier member with this airline for 11 years. My booking confirmation number is in that same boarding pass you are looking at." I am happy to wait while you verify anything that needs verifying, but I would prefer to do it here, in the line, where I am standing, since I have done nothing that requires me to step aside. His voice was perfectly even. Not loud. Not aggressive. The voice of a man who had learned, over 51 years, that the moment you raise your voice is the moment you lose the conversation. He had learned that lesson the hard way, decades ago, and he had never forgotten it. Christine's jaw tightened slightly. She called over a colleague, a younger woman named Priya, who came to the counter and looked at the screen and then looked at Darnell and said, with genuine apology already forming in her eyes, "Sir, your booking looks completely fine. Seat 2A, first class, confirmed. You're all set to board." Christine said nothing. Darnell picked up his passport. He picked up his carry-on. He looked at Christine for exactly 3 seconds, which is longer than it sounds when the silence is total, and then he walked down the jetway and boarded the aircraft. He took his seat. The flight attendant brought him water. He looked out the window at the gray Chicago morning, at the planes moving slowly across the tarmac like enormous patient animals, and he breathed. Just breathed. He was not new to this. That was perhaps the most exhausting part. Not the incident itself, which had lasted less than 5 minutes, but the knowledge behind it, the accumulated weight of every version of that same moment he had experienced across 51 years of living in his skin. The first time had been a department store in Cincinnati when he was 14. The most recent time before today had been a hotel lobby in Dallas 3 months ago. The details changed. The pause, the glance, the sudden need for additional verification, those never did. He opened his laptop. He had work to do. He always had work to do. That had been his answer to most things since he was young, the work, the next thing to build, the next problem to solve. His mother used to say that he turned everything into a project, and she said it the way mothers say things that are both criticism and praise at the same time. She had been gone 7 years now. He still heard her voice most mornings. He did not call anyone during the flight. He did not send emails about what had happened. He sat with the window light coming through clean and thought about the subcommittee meeting and the nonprofit breakfast and the 2 million miles and the watch on his wrist and his mother's hands. He thought about the young man he had been at 22, arriving in Chicago with a suitcase and a scholarship and the absolute terror of wanting something so badly that the wanting itself felt dangerous. He thought about all the rooms he had walked into since then where someone's eyes had done what Christine's eyes had done this morning, and how he had learned, slowly and at some cost, to keep walking anyway. The flight was 2 hours. He slept for 40 minutes, which he almost never did on short flights. When he woke up, Washington was below him, gray and wide and serious in the way that city always is. He had not planned to do anything about what happened at the gate. He had turned it over in his mind during the flight and arrived at the familiar place he always arrived, the question of whether the effort required was worth the result available, and his answer had been what it usually was, which was probably not. He had a full day ahead. He had a Senate subcommittee to address. He had young men at a breakfast table tomorrow who needed his attention more than Christine at gate B14 needed his response. But something happened when he landed. His phone, which he had kept on airplane mode for the flight, came back to life with a sequence of notifications that changed his calculus entirely. His assistant Marcus had texted him 7 times. His communications director had called twice. There were alerts from 3 different news aggregators. Someone at the gate, one of the passengers who had been standing in line with their phone already raised, had posted a video. The video showed the entire exchange, from the moment Christine asked him to step aside to the moment Priya told him his booking was fine, clearly and without ambiguity. It showed Christine's expression. It showed his. It had been viewed, in the 2 hours since posting, almost 400,000 times. The comments were not ambiguous. People recognized exactly what they had seen. Other travelers shared their own versions of the same story. Former airline employees offered context. A hashtag had formed around his name. Darnell sat in the cab to his hotel and read all of it, slowly, with the same measured attention he gave to quarterly reports and term sheets and all the other documents that required him to understand exactly what he was dealing with before he responded. He called Marcus. He said, "Get me the executive vice president of customer experience at the airline. Not a PR representative. Not a regional manager. The EVP. Today." Marcus said, "I already have a call in." Darnell said, "Good." Then he said, "And get me the foundation on the line at 3 o'clock. I want to talk about the airport workers initiative." Marcus paused briefly and said, "The one we've been developing for the workforce program." Darnell said, "Yes. It's time to move it forward." The hotel meeting room where Darnell took the call with the airline's EVP, a man named Richard Calloway, was a beige and efficient space with a view of a parking structure. Darnell sat at the table with Marcus beside him and his communications director on speakerphone, and he was, as always, completely prepared. He had the booking confirmation. He had the dates and amounts of every first-class ticket he had purchased with that airline over 11 years. He had the total dollar figure, which was substantial. He had the video, which he had watched twice on the flight from Chicago. Richard Calloway spent the first several minutes of the call expressing regret in the practiced, careful language of corporate sincerity. He used phrases like "does not reflect our values and not the experience we want any customer to have, and we take this very seriously." Darnell let him finish. He was patient the way he had always been patient, the patience of someone who has learned that letting a person exhaust their prepared remarks clears the air for the actual conversation. When Richard finished, Darnell said, "I appreciate what you have said. I want to tell you what I am looking for, and what I am not looking for." Richard said, "Of course." Darnell said, "I am not looking for an apology to me personally, though I accept yours. I am not looking for compensation or an upgrade on my next flight. I am not looking for a press release. What I am looking for is a conversation about the mechanism by which what happened this morning happens, how it gets trained into a workforce or not trained out of one, and what a company the size of yours can do structurally to address it." There was a pause on the line. Richard said, "That is a conversation we would genuinely welcome." Darnell said, "Good. I also want to tell you about something my foundation has been developing." The gate crew at B-14 was reassigned the following week, pending a formal review. Christine received mandatory additional training in a program the airline was fast-tracking in partnership with a civil rights organization. This was not announced publicly by the airline. Darnell did not announce it either. He had not asked for public consequences. He had asked for structural ones, and he was cautious enough about human nature to know that public shaming rarely produces the internal change that makes anything actually different. What he did announce, 6 weeks later, was a new partnership between KW Capital Group's charitable foundation and a workforce development nonprofit called Pathways Forward that would fund a 2-year program training 200 airport and airline service workers annually, with particular emphasis on implicit bias education, de-escalation, and what the program called Dignity in Service. The program was funded initially at $3 million with a commitment to review and expand after the first cohort. It was not named after the incident at O'Hare. It was not framed as a response to it. It was framed as what Darnell actually believed it was, an investment in the people who show up every day in uniform and deserve to be equipped to do their jobs with wisdom and grace. At the announcement event, held in a conference room in Chicago with a modest gathering of nonprofit leaders, airline representatives, and a handful of journalists, Darnell spoke for 11 minutes. He did not mention Christine. He did not mention Gate B-14. He spoke about his mother, briefly, the way he almost never did in public. He said that she had worked in service her entire adult life, that she had cleaned offices and pressed other people's clothes and smiled at people who did not always smile back, and that she had done it with a dignity that he had spent his whole career trying to understand and honor. He said that service work is not lesser work. He said that the people who move through airports every day carrying the enormous responsibility of keeping human beings safe and moving deserve every tool available to help them do it well. There was a woman in the second row who had worked as a flight attendant for 23 years. When he finished speaking, she was pressing a tissue to the corner of her eye, not dramatically, just quietly, the way people cry when something true has been said in a room. Darnell saw her. He nodded once, gently. She nodded back. After the event, Marcus drove him back to the office through the Chicago afternoon, the lake visible between buildings as they moved through the loop, gray and enormous and unchanged by anything that happened near it. Darnell looked out the window with the watch on his wrist catching light and thought about 2 million miles and what they add up to. Not the destinations. Not the contracts signed or the meetings attended or the hands shaken. The miles themselves, the accumulation of mornings when you put your bag on your shoulder and walked through a terminal and held yourself together when something tried to take something from you, and kept walking, and kept building, and kept believing that the next room you walked into was worth walking into. His phone buzzed. It was a text from a young man named Jerome who had come through one of KW's mentorship programs 3 years ago and was now running a small real estate investment operation in Atlanta. The text said, "Saw the announcement today. You never stop. Thank you." Darnell typed back, "Neither do you." Keep going. He put the phone in his pocket. He watched the lake until the buildings closed around it and it disappeared. He thought about a suitcase and a scholarship and the absolute terror of wanting something so badly the wanting felt dangerous. He thought about how that feeling never entirely goes away. He thought about how maybe that is not the worst thing, how maybe the wanting, the reaching, the refusal to accept the ceiling you were handed, is exactly what keeps a person honest about what still needs to be done. The car pulled up in front of his building. He picked up his bag. He thanked Marcus. He walked through the lobby where the security guard, a man named Henry who had worked the desk for 9 years, greeted him by name and asked how Washington had been. Darnell said, "Productive." Henry said, "That's all you can ask for." Darnell said, "That's all you can ask for." He took the elevator up. He had 3 more meetings before the end of the day and a phone call with the nonprofit before dinner and a report to review before he slept. Tomorrow there would be new things to build and new rooms to walk into, and probably, somewhere along the way, another moment that tried to tell him he did not belong where he was standing. He would stand there anyway. He always had. If this story reached something in you today, something you have carried or something you needed to hear, please let us know in the comments below. Your words matter here, and this community is built on the understanding that our stories, all of them, deserve to be told with dignity and heard with care. If you are watching on YouTube, please like this video and share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe to the Black Voices if you have not already, because we are here every week with stories that speak to what it means to keep going, keep building, and keep believing in the possibility of something better. Thank you for being here. We will see you next time.